Please try to relax. There is plenty of time. I need to tell you something. Please listen and try not to panic. You've been in a coma for quite some time. Yes, I know you would like to know how long. I'm afraid it's been 9 years. Damn it! Nosocoma! Nosocoma! Nosocoma!
Controversy and Hideo Kojima have seemingly always gone hand in hand, and it's easy to see why. Any creative as keen on testing boundaries, pushing limits, and challenging conventions as Kojima is, and always has been with his works, is going to divide opinion. And sure enough, that's exactly what he's done time and time again over the course of his illustrious career. Even with all of that in mind, however, it doesn't feel like a stretch to say that Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain is probably the most controversial game Kojima has ever made. It's been 9 years since The Phantom Pain released, and changed everything not only for the Metal Gear franchise, but also for the creator of the franchise, the publisher of the franchise, and the relationship between the two. Of course, in spite of the many issues that it undeniably launched with, MGS5 was somehow still an absolute masterpiece of a game, standing to this day as probably the best playing stealth game ever made, but it'd be fair to say that the game came with as many caveats as it did with strengths. Close to a decade on from its launch, here we're going to take a look at the entire history of Metal Gear Solid 5 and its development before going over the game itself, what made it tick, what it was missing, and more. The Ruse cruise begins. It's hard not to be fascinated by every step of the story surrounding Metal Gear Solid 5, even going all the way back to when it was first unveiled. For that, we have to wind the clock back by a dozen years to 2012, when Konami celebrated Metal Gear's 25th anniversary with the announcement of the series' next mainline installment, or, well, sort of. What Konami and series creator Hideo Kojima really announced was Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes, a game that little details were actually revealed on, other than the fact that it was designed as a prologue that would lead up to the actual MGS5. It was also announced that Ground Zeroes was being built on Fox Engine, an entirely new internal engine that Kojima and Konami both were particularly proud of. Over the coming months, Kojima, in typical Kojima fashion, began feeding out bits and pieces of new details on the upcoming game, and with each new tidbit, it became increasingly apparent that once again, he and his team were by no means content to play things safe. For starters, the legendary director confirmed that Ground Zeroes would feature far fewer and much shorter cutscenes than past titles, which for a series that had become almost synonymous with long, elaborate cinematics, came as sort of a surprise to say the very least. Kojima also talked about the heavy themes that he was tackling with the game. In a way, that came as no surprise. Thematic depth is something that Kojima's works always have in droves, after all, but according to him, Ground Zeroes was particularly risky. Risk isn't something that Kojima has ever been adverse to, however, and with Ground Zeroes, he decided to once again swing for the fences, deciding to prioritize his creative ambitions rather than worrying about whether there might be potentially alienate prospective buyers. But Ground Zeroes' announcement was only the first step in Kojima and Konami's grand and unusual plan for unveiling the next chapter in the Metal Gear saga. And at the Spike Video Game Awards in December of 2012, it was time for Step 2, and it was one to remember. A new and unknown developer by the name Moby Dick Studios stepped into the spotlight and unveiled its new game, The Phantom Pain, which instantly grabbed attention with its visual and cinematic ambitions. Coming from an unknown studio and revealing little to no information beyond its debut trailer, the game was clouded in mystery, though it didn't take long after its announcement for people to start connecting the dots. To many, it was clear as day that the Phantom Pain was the next MGS title. From how often we saw very Metal Gear-esque imagery throughout its debut trailer, to its Fox Engine-esque visuals, to the fact that the first name of purported studio head Joachim Mogren was an anagram for Kojima, to show how the words Metal Gear Solid V could fit perfectly into the negative space in its logo, there was definitely no shortage of evidence pointing to the same. Kojima, of course, kept the Ruse cruise going, and as he always does, he had a lot of fun with it. Not long after Moby Dick Studios announced the Phantom Pain, for instance, Game Trailers held an interview with the aforementioned Joachim Morgan, who appeared on screen with his face almost entirely bandaged, winking and nudging not only at the game's content, but also at the mysterious existence of the fictitious studio head. During the interview, Mogren accidentally revealed a screenshot that featured the Fox Engine logo, further adding fuel to the fire, and belief that the Phantom Pain was a Metal Gear game grew progressively stronger.
Some concept art, there's the whale it looks like. Oh wow, those look like some new screens. Oh, the main character, so these are screenshots. I noticed there's a Fox Engine logo in the corner, so this game is running on the Fox Engine.
Finally, it was in March of 2013, not too much longer after its announcement, that the Phantom Pain was officially confirmed to be Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. According to Kojima, the purpose of announcing it as a standalone title was nothing to do with Metal Gear or himself, was so that Konami could actually get proper feedbacks on the Fox Engine and what it was actually capable of, without any potential biases that could creep in with Metal Gear involved. Of course, ultimately it didn't take long for people to figure out exactly what was going on, but boy are we glad that Kojima and Konami had the drive and willingness to adopt such a unique marketing strategy for the game. If nothing else, it's always fun to think back on. Face of the franchise. Controversy continued to follow Metal Gear Solid 5 in the wake of its full announcement. In fact, if anything, it only grew, which had a lot to do with many of the changes that the game was making to the series' established formula. For starters, following its announcement, Kojima made it abundantly clear on no few occasions that the Phantom Pain wasn't going to be nearly as heavy on the style of storytelling that Metal Gear Solid had always been synonymous with. That would mean much less dialogue, fewer and shorter cutscenes, and a much larger emphasis being placed on gameplay and emergent mechanics, which of course also had a lot to do with the fact that MGS5 was going to be fully open world and a first for the series. Now, we'll get to all of that later though, because honestly those weren't even the most controversial changes that the game was making, though its open world nature certainly raised eyebrows for more than a few longtime series fans. No, what really shook Metal Gear Solid veteran fanatics was the fact that David Hayter wasn't coming back as Big Boss. Over the course of the franchise's history, Hayter had become synonymous with the characters of both Solid Snake and Big Boss, and without his iconic performances and instantly recognizable cadence, it's fair to say that both characters wouldn't have found the sort of love within the Metal Gear fanbase that they did.
I'm David Hayter, the voice of Solid Snake, Old Snake, and Big Boss. Whether you're a longtime Metal Gear Solid fan or your mission has just begun, we're pulling out all the stops to make the legendary franchise more enjoyable than ever before.
As Hayter would reveal in later years, however, the rift between himself and Kojima had been festering for years already. Allegedly, Kojima had tried to replace Hayter on several occasions in the past, from trying to find actors who could emulate Hayter's performance, to even trying to go and get Kurt Russell to play Naked Snake in Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Those attempts were obviously unsuccessful, but with Metal Gear Solid 5, Kojima and Konami finally did that with the change, and it wasn't one that fans were actually happy about. Of course, it'd be foolish to doubt the acting talent of Kiefer Sutherland, who stepped into the role of Big Boss and Venom Snake for Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain. According to Kojima, the reason the change was made was to get a more physically subtle and nuanced performance for the character using performance capture, rather than a performance that, like in previous games, was driven entirely by voice acting. Funnily enough, the game's Japanese dub did retain series mainstay Akio Otsuka as the voice of Big Boss.
This time, with Metal Gear Solid 5, the themes are a little different from previous games in the series. We're taking on some very heavy subjects, such as race and revenge. This makes the tone much darker. As a result, I wanted Snake to have a more subdued performance, expressed through subtle facial movements and tone of voice rather than words.
In the year since he was replaced by Sutherland, Hayter has, on multiple occasions, voiced his displeasure about how the situation was handled by Kojima and Konami, even having outright called it humiliating for himself. Metal Gear Solid fans too have made their discontentment known. Sutherland, being the incredible actor that he is, obviously did a great job as Big Boss and Venom Snake, but for longtime series fans there was something missing without Hader's iconic gravelly delivery, while it also didn't help that the game and its script almost wasted Sutherland's acting chops by not giving him nearly as much to do as you would expect from a Metal Gear protagonist.
A shining light to our brothers in arms. Even in death. We are diamond dogs.
Thankfully, there's been a reunion of sorts where Hader and Metal Gear are confirmed. With Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater coming up, Hader has been very visibly involved in its official marketing, which has been great to see for fans of the franchise. The remake is, of course, using the original game's voices, which means Hader's Naked Snake will return exactly as we remember him too.
You have to keep everything that fans love. The story, characters, gameplay, music, and of course, voice acting.
Run for the hills. 2014 was an eventful year for Konami and Kojima, and one that suggested a much different future for the two than the one that actually ended up panning out. For starters, this was the year that saw the launch of Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes, though a little divisive, or perhaps more than just a little, for some of the many ways it set itself apart from its predecessors, some of which we've already touched on, not to mention the price that it launched for, and the amount of content that it delivered against that price. Ultimately, it was deemed an exciting prelude to a potentially all-timer main meal. From its incredible open-world design and open-ended sandbox stealth mechanics, to its narrative developments and the things that it set up for its follow-up, Ground Zeroes inspired no shortage of confidence in what Kojima and his team would deliver with the Phantom Pain.
Kept you waiting, huh?
Interestingly enough, however, Metal Gear was not the only thing that Kojima was focused on at Konami. Up to that point, over the last couple of years, he had explicitly expressed his interest in making a new Silent Hill game. Kojima felt that as a smaller scale, horror-focused experience, it would prove an exciting challenge for him as a developer, given that he had previously always worked on very different kinds of projects. Meanwhile, the prospect of being able to deliver a visually and technically top-notch horror experience using the Fox engine was also one that he was intrigued by. Finally, he was also confident that, as someone who is very sensitive to horror himself, he actually called himself a scaredy cat and chicken on several occasions, he could deliver a very particular and potent brand of horror. And clearly, the higher-ups at Konami agreed, because by 2014, Kojima's plans for reviving Silent Hill were well and truly underway, though in true Kojima fashion, they were unveiled to the world in a most unusual manner possible. In August, Konami silently dropped a free, short, playable demo of a mysterious first-person psychological horror title called, and you guessed it, PT. It was, in essence, little more than a brief concept teaser, but it was so incredibly well made and so spectacularly terrifying that it instantly took the industry by storm. What helped, of course, was the surprise ending, which confirmed to an entirely unsuspecting audience that Kojima Productions and Konami were working on a new Silent Hill game called Silent Hills, which PT was a playable teaser for. The project would see Kojima and filmmaker Guillermo del Toro working together as creative leads, with Norman Reedus of The Walking Dead fame set to star as the protagonist. It was an ingenious way to announce what sounded like an incredibly exciting revival of a legendary franchise. The future was certainly bright for Silent Hill. Or, well, so we thought at any rate. If 2014 was a year of hope and optimism for Kojima and Konami's future collaborations, 2015 was the year where it all came crashing down in the most heartbreaking manner possible, with the Metal Gear creator departing from the company under acrimonious circumstances that remain shrouded in mystery to this very day. Silent Hills was cancelled, PT was nuked from the PlayStation Store as thoroughly as it could be nuked, and Konami removed Kojima's name from all marketing and promotional material for all things Metal Gear. Officially, next to nothing is known about why Kojima left. There was, of course, no shortage of leaks and speculation, and it was widely suggested that the relationship between Konami and Kojima had soured due to the latter's prolonged development cycles and the overspending that they led to. But again, officially, we never really got any confirmation one way or another. Publicly, Kojima has only had positive things to say about Konami on the few occasions that he has spoken about his former employer. The reason why I am who I am now is because of the 30 years I had at Konami, he told in a Famitsu interview in 2019. I am grateful to Konami and I cannot deny that connection. Either way, it was clear that one way or another, Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain was going to be the end of the Metal Gear franchise as we knew it. Expectations had already been high from the open-world stealth epic in the lead-up to its release, as you'd expect from any game bearing the Metal Gear name, but as Kojima's last game at Konami, and potentially the last mainline Metal Gear game we'd be seeing in a long time, if not ever, it now somehow had significantly higher heights than it needed to scale, and did it? Well, a flawed masterpiece. Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain is a deeply flawed game, and incredibly frustrating in particular for the series' biggest fans. Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain is a masterclass in stealth design and emergent open-world gameplay, standing as probably the best game of its kind to this day. Both of those statements are equally true. This game is the textbook definition of a diamond in the rough. A lot of that is down to the game's strengths as an emergent stealth experience. Systemic open-world games are now as common as, well, open-world games in general are, but in 2015 The Phantom Pain delivered something very unique for its time, with a cascade of systems and mechanics coming together to form an intricate multi-layered web of perfectly harmonious gameplay. Venom Snake's massive and varied toolset, combined with the game's incredibly tight moment-to-moment movement and stealth mechanics, which in turn mingled with the excellent dynamic systems like the game's physics, Snake's many companions, its day and night options, the dynamic weather, the incredible AI which adapted to you and your actions, and so on, so much more. I mean, which game allows you to do this? Meanwhile, on top of its abundance of content and the rich systemic depth it offers, The Phantom Pain also boasts engaging base building mechanics with Mother Base. This is besides the FOB and MGO that can provide dozens of hours of new gameplay experiences. Bang for your buck? Well, in that area at the very least, the game did not disappoint. Of course, it's by no means a perfect game. There's a lot of repeated missions, especially in the later stages, and from a story perspective, The Phantom Pain is more than a little divisive. A lot of that is down to the final twist reveal, which we're not going to spoil here obviously, so don't worry. But for many, an even bigger problem with the game is how it supposedly leaves so many questions unanswered, even though it was billed as the game that would finally bring Big Boss's past to later Metal Gear stories. But does it leave those questions actually unanswered? Well, not on paper actually. There's absolutely no denying that MGS5 does have a litany of storytelling issues, but if what you're looking for is pure narrative material, the game is brimming with it, and to an extent that most wouldn't actually believe. The many tapes and audio logs that you find throughout the experience are overflowing with fascinating narrative revelations and answers that fill in a lot of the blanks there. There are also hints in the game as to where they will go next and lay the groundwork for Outer Heaven. It obviously is not the ideal way to consume so much story, especially not in a Metal Gear game, but at the very least we can take solace in the fact that The Phantom Pain does have a lot of the answers that so many were looking for it to deliver, even if you do have to go out of the way looking for them. Interestingly enough, if things had gone differently, The Phantom Pain could have taken a very different direction with its story. Author and series expert Kenji Yaro revealed in a Famitsu interview in 2016 that the story concept that Kojima had originally revealed to him for MGS5 would have retained elements such as the Moby Dick motif, and themes of race, revenge, language, vocal cord parasites, and phantom pain, but much else would have changed, from an emphasis on commentary on American exceptionalism to the role of Ahab being played by Huey Emmerich instead of Big Boss, which certainly would have been fascinating to see. Now, back to the present, however, we obviously can't talk about The Phantom Pain without going over its infamous cut content. But what exactly was cut from the game?
I knew you'd be through here!
You're not a kid anymore. You can call your own shots.
The Phantom Pain. It'll be no surprise to you that our focus here is on episode 51, a narrative epilogue that, as per leaked internal fact sheets, was supposed to be a post-launch edition, but as we now infamously know, never really reached the finishing line. But though episode 51 was the bulk of the actual tangible content that ended up on the cutting floor, there was also no shortage of concepts and ideas for a number of game-wide systems and mechanics for the base experience itself that were shelved earlier during the game's development. Let's go over a bunch that stand out to us to this very day. Security dogs. The Phantom Pain features a decent number of options when it comes to companions that players can take with them for missions, which includes, but not limited to, D-Dog. But fans might be surprised to know that the game was also supposed to feature similar companion dogs for enemies who would charge at the player once spotted, or would sniff them out for a certain distance. Ground Zeroes featured this enemy type in the opening cutscene, but for some reason they were never seen again in the rest of the game. The Phantom Pain was supposed to have them as per-soldier voice lines present in the game's files. In some sequences, enemy soldiers will still command them, but the only difference is they are nowhere to be found. They are truly phantom dogs. Quite poetic, isn't it?
Take your damn time. You find some boy? What's up?
Battle Gear. The Battle Gear is one of the most powerful possessions of Diamond Dogs, which is why obtaining it is essential for completing the toughest combat deployment challenges. It's very likely that you might want to try the Battle Gear in actual gameplay, and while it isn't possible in the final game, players had such an option at some point during the game's development. However, it was eventually removed since it had an adverse effect on the game's balance, according to the game testers. Fortunately, a PC mod, which is in prototype stage, has brought it back, although it just replaces one of the existing vehicles in the game. It doesn't have proper collision, doesn't have various modes. This thing was just supposed to have like the hover mode, amongst others. I guess something is better than nothing. Various bionic arms. Venom Snake has a prosthetic limb attached to his hand, and players can swap out different models of the prosthetics to add more combat functionality to this awesome tool. You can use it to stun enemies with a shock blast, or you could unleash significant damage from a distance with a rocket punch through the use of the blast arm, or you can even spring enemies forward towards you. The team planned to include additional bionic arm types, such as a flaming firearm, which would most likely deal fire damage to enemies. There's also a parasite arm, an archaeal arm, and even a medical arm, which would most likely have some healing properties. All these arms were likely cut during concept stage, and as such never saw the light of day. PT Active Decoy. Venom Snake can utilize inflatable decoys of himself to distract and fool enemies, allowing him to slip by undetected. But did you know that the game once allowed players to use a decoy of PT's Lisa to scare enemies as well? Konami had showcased this tool during one of its pre-launch presentations for the game, but it was eventually removed in the final release. Some suspect that the removal was due to the Silent Hills project being canned, while others believe that it was never intended to actually be in the final release in the first place. Whatever the case may be, it would have certainly been hilarious to use this decoy in night missions to scare your enemies to death. Fortunately for PC players, a mod is available that brings back this decoy by replacing an existing one. Cut vehicle types. Metal Gear Solid 5 allows players to use different vehicles to get around areas or make a quick escape. Naturally, some of the planned vehicles were left on the cutting floor during some of the development. For instance, the prologue section would allow players to drive an ambulance after the escape from the hospital. In addition to this, you would have the option to ride the Triumph Bonneville T100 motorcycle once you finish Mission 46. Then there were different kinds of armored vehicles like the variable tank, which simply were cut during concept stage. 4th Skulls Unit Light. The Skulls are powerful enemy types that can quickly take you down if you are not careful with your tactics, and the final release features 3 different Skull units, namely Mist, Camouflage, and Armor. But once there were plans to include a 4th Skulls unit codenamed Light. And while we don't really know the exact details on how those units would function, they certainly look really intriguing with their designs. The Phantom Pain lacks good boss fights, and a 4th Skulls unit would have probably remedied that. Chico. Fans familiar with Ground Zeroes and Peace Walker might know about Chico, a major character in Big Boss's story arc. The Phantom Pain doesn't feature this character in its story, but the developers had once planned to include him. According to an alleged script of the game, Amanda would have called Venom Snake, telling him that Chico is alive near Zaire and that he needs to be killed. According to Kojima, Chico would have been and have been obsessed with killing, but he was removed since the story didn't really fit well into the game's structure. Chico's concept art was later revealed, and he truly looks like someone who has seen a lot of violence. Modders also found out that the game references a village called Chico Village in Africa map. Since then, they have been able to load that portion of the map in the game, but as of right now, the map is really just empty. Furthermore, according to the companion app, the developers had planned to have 2 different missions on Chico, which are supposed to be about his extraction in Africa. There were even text in the game's files that had Miller talking about him. Sheep Disguise. If you have struggled to complete a particularly challenging mission in Metal Gear Solid 5, you might have been greeted with an option to don a chicken hat, which makes you look like an absolute joker in exchange for an easy win. However, at one point the devs also planned to include a sheep disguise hat into the game. This would have allowed the player to hide and sneak Snake in a sheep herd and thereby remain undetected from the enemy. One-on-one fight with Ocelot. Those who have played Metal Gear Solid 4 would be familiar with the Liquid Ocelot boss fight, which was easily one of the highlights of that experience. Kojima probably wanted to do a throwback to that mano-a-mano fight in the first mission. An official concept art indicates that Venom Snake would be taking part in a fistfight with Ocelot in the first mission of the game, which was probably intended as a CQC training session of sorts. Of course, that section is absent from the final release for unknown reasons. Skullface boss fight. Skullface is one of the primary antagonistic forces in the game, and the grand lead up to the confrontation would suggest that a fantastic boss fight lies on the other side. But what actually happens is that you are treated to a long cutscene, and only his execution is carried out by the player. Unused dialogues in the codebase suggest that a boss fight was planned at some point during the game's development, but it was later scrapped since Kojima wanted to retain the theme of Phantom Pain with this decision. So while you do have a fantastic looking boss who goes down in style, you don't actually get to fight in terms of gameplay. It was also found in the game files that at some point Skullface, along with Kid Liquid and Mantis, were supposed to be recruitable as Mother-based staff, but I guess that was cut since that wouldn't fit into the themes of the story. Skullface weapon. Much like the Skullface boss fight that we discussed before, his signature weapon, the lever-action rifle, was supposed to be part of Venom Snake's arsenal once the player takes care of the big bad, but was removed at some point during development. The game's codebase still contains statistics and description for this item, but there aren't any animations for the gun, so while you can technically use the weapon through modding, it is nowhere close to complete. Liquid was playable. Liquid is one of the prominent characters in Phantom Pain's story, and was supposed to have his own gameplay sections during development. He even had 2 different costumes, namely Panther and Real Tree, which can still be found within the game's files. But alas, that idea was scrapped for some reason, which is a shame because it would turn out to be a great change of pace from controlling Venom Snake for such a long time. Unused interrogation commands. Players have the option to sneak up to enemies and ask them to spill out information about their allies and ammo caches through several interrogation commands. You get to choose between a handful of commands, but this mechanic originally had even more commands that you could use against enemies. You could force the soldier to respond to his radio calls or lie about something in the radio among a couple of others. The codebase contains sound files for these commands, and tinkerers have also unearthed several radio lines for soldiers that point out the location of security dogs. And finally, 9 years later. Cut content, controversies, acrimonious departures, and changed leader actors should collectively have sunk any game, no matter how prominent or popular. So the fact that Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain is genuinely one of the best stealth games ever made, in spite of the barrage of issues that it had to deal with during development, and the issues that led to in the game itself, should tell you everything you need to know about how unbelievably incredible of a gaming experience it is. Even now, close to a decade on from its release, The Phantom Pain still feels excellent to play. Its immersive, sim-esque qualities make it infinitely replayable, with players being constantly encouraged to push the game's systems to their limits in the most creative ways possible. Experimentation and creativity are rewarded in constantly surprising ways throughout the experience, to the extent that even after hundreds of hours of gameplay, you can still discover new details or interactions that you never knew existed.
Every night, I can feel my leg. My arm, even my fingers. The body I've lost. The comrades I've lost won't stop hurting. It's like they're all still there. You feel it too, don't you?
So, what are your thoughts on this? Go ahead and share them in the comments below. And if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel and enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon to get new video updates. We upload every day and would really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching.